Hello, dear ones. My name is Eleanor and I'm 75 years old. I've lived through wars, raised children, buried my parents, and survived more heartache than most people could imagine. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I'm about to tell you. 3 months ago, my daughter-in-law Sarah called me with news that should have filled my heart with joy. "Eleanor," she said, her voice trembling with what I thought was excitement, "I'm pregnant." I remember dropping my teacup. The delicate china my mother had given me 40 years ago shattered against the kitchen floor, just like my world was about to. But in that moment I was overjoyed. A grandchild. After years of hoping, praying, waiting for my son Michael and Sarah to start a family. "Oh, sweetheart." I cried into the phone. "Michael must be over the moon." The silence that followed was deafening. When Sarah finally spoke, her words came out in broken whispers. "Eleanor, we need to talk. All of us. Tonight." That evening, as I sat in my living room with my husband of 52 years, Harold, and watched my son Michael pace back and forth like a caged animal, I knew something was terribly wrong. Sarah sat in the corner chair, her hands folded over her still flat stomach, tears streaming down her face. "Mom," Michael began, his voice cracking like he was 13 again, "the baby, it's not mine." I laughed. Actually laughed. Because surely this was some kind of mistake, some medical mix-up that could be sorted out. "Don't be ridiculous, honey. Of course it's yours. You and Sarah have been trying for. It's Dad's." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything I'd ever believed in. Harold. My Harold, the man who'd held my hand through chemotherapy, who still brought me coffee in bed every morning, who'd sworn to love only me until death do us part, hadn't said a word. He just sat there staring at his hands. That's when I knew. The silence was his confession. "You have to understand, we weren't just any family. We were the family everyone envied." Harold and I met in 1972 when I was 23 and he was 25. He was a construction foreman then, with calloused hands and the kindest brown eyes I'd ever seen. I was a secretary at the local newspaper, dreaming of becoming a writer someday. Our courtship was like something out of a movie. He'd pick me up after work in his old pickup truck and we'd drive to the lake just to talk for hours. He proposed on Christmas Eve, 1973, with a ring he'd saved for 8 months to buy. It wasn't much, a tiny diamond on a simple band, but when he slipped it on my finger and promised to love me forever, I felt like the richest woman in the world. We married the following spring. Our wedding photos showed 2 young people absolutely drunk on love, surrounded by both our families. Harold's mother told me that day, "You've found a good man, Eleanor. He'll never break your heart." I believed her with every fiber of my being. Michael came along in 1976. Harold cried when he held his son for the first time, actually cried tears of joy. He was such a devoted father. He taught Michael to throw a baseball, helped with homework every night, never missed a school play or soccer game. When Michael graduated high school, Harold's chest puffed out with pride like he was about to burst. Harold built our life with the same care he brought to every construction project. We owned our home outright, a beautiful colonial he'd renovated himself. We took family vacations to the Grand Canyon, Disney World, Yellowstone. Every Sunday we attended church together, sitting in the same pew we'd claimed 30 years ago. Our marriage wasn't perfect, no marriage is, but it was solid. We weathered my battle with breast cancer in my 40s, Harold's heart attack at 58, the death of both our mothers within 2 years of each other. Through it all, we held each other up. We were a team. When Michael brought Sarah home 6 years ago, I saw the same look in his eyes that Harold had when he first met me. Sarah was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was kind. She remembered my birthday, helped me in the kitchen during holidays, called just to check on me when I was feeling under the weather. She fit into our family like she'd always belonged there. Their wedding 3 years ago was everything I dreamed of for my son. Sarah looked radiant in her grandmother's dress, and Michael couldn't stop grinning. Harold walked her down the aisle when her own father couldn't make it. He'd passed away when she was young. I remember thinking how perfect it was, how our family was complete. We spent holidays together, Sunday dinners, birthday celebrations. Sarah and I would shop for Christmas presents together, gossiping about Michael's terrible fashion sense and Harold's obsession with the Weather Channel. Harold would joke that he'd gained 2 daughters, me and Sarah, and wasn't sure he could handle all the estrogen in the house. This was our life. This was our foundation. Built on love, trust, and 52 years of shared dreams. Looking back now, I can see the signs. They were there, like hairline cracks in a wall that you don't notice until the whole structure comes crashing down. It started about a year ago, though I didn't recognize it then. Harold began offering to help Sarah with things that seemed perfectly reasonable. When Michael was working late at the accounting firm, Harold would offer to fix Sarah's leaky faucet or help her move furniture. "No sense in her struggling alone," he'd say, and I'd agree. That's what families do, they help each other. But then Harold started spending more and more time at Michael and Sarah's house. He'd leave after breakfast, claiming Sarah needed help with some project or another, and wouldn't return until dinner time. When I'd ask what they'd worked on, his answers were vague. Just some electrical work, or helping her organize the garage. I noticed Sarah calling Harold directly instead of going through Michael for household issues. She'd text him about a strange noise in the attic or a problem with the furnace. Harold would drop everything to rush over there, even leaving me mid-conversation sometimes. "She's like the daughter we never had," Harold would say when I mentioned how often he was helping her. "And you know Michael's useless with tools." That part was true. My son had somehow inherited none of his father's mechanical abilities. He could balance complex budgets and file taxes with his eyes closed, but ask him to change a light bulb and he'd probably electrocute himself. So Harold's explanations made sense. But there were other things. Smaller things that made my stomach flutter with unease. The way Harold's face would light up when Sarah entered a room. How he'd find excuses to touch her arm when he was explaining something, or stand just a little too close when they were looking at his repair work together. How Sarah started dressing differently when she knew Harold was coming over. Prettier blouses, a little more makeup than necessary for staying home. I caught them once, standing in Sarah's kitchen, talking in voices so low I couldn't make out the words. But their body language spoke volumes. They were facing each other, closer than necessary, and when I cleared my throat to announce my presence, they jumped apart like teenagers caught necking. "Just explaining how to reset the garbage disposal," Harold said quickly, but his face was flushed. Sarah wouldn't meet my eyes. During family dinners, I started noticing how they'd steal glances at each other across the table. How Sarah would laugh just a little too hard at Harold's jokes. Jokes I'd heard 1,000 times and that weren't even that funny. How Harold would find reasons to compliment Sarah's cooking, even though I'd taught her most of the recipes myself. Michael seemed oblivious to it all. He'd be checking his phone or talking about work, completely unaware of the charged atmosphere between his wife and his father. Sometimes I wondered if I was imagining things, if my imagination was running wild. But a woman knows. Deep down, in that place where instinct lives, I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't bring myself to believe what that something might be. The breaking point came 2 months before Sarah's pregnancy announcement. I'd stopped by their house unexpectedly to drop off some tomatoes from my garden. The front door was unlocked, so I let myself in, calling out as I entered. I found them in the living room. Not doing anything overtly inappropriate. Sarah was crying and Harold was holding her hands, sitting beside her on the couch. But the intimacy of the moment, the way he was looking at her, the tenderness in his voice as he whispered something I couldn't hear. It was the way a man comforts a woman he loves. Not the way a father-in-law comforts his son's wife. They broke apart when they saw me, Sarah wiping her tears quickly. "I was just upset about something at work," she explained, but her excuse felt hollow. That night I asked Harold about it. "Sarah seemed pretty shaken up today. Everything okay?" He shrugged. "Just work stress. You know how emotional women can get." The dismissive way he said it stung. Harold had never been the type to diminish women's feelings. If anything, he'd always been remarkably understanding and supportive. I started paying closer attention after that. I noticed Harold taking extra care with his appearance when he knew he'd see Sarah. I noticed Sarah texting someone frequently during family gatherings, always keeping her phone face down when Michael was near. I noticed them finding excuses to leave the room together, returning with flushed cheeks and avoiding eye contact. But I loved them both too much to let my suspicions take root. Harold was my husband of 52 years. Sarah was the daughter I'd never had. They were my family. My foundation. Surely I was wrong. Surely there was an innocent explanation for everything I was seeing. The human heart has an amazing capacity for denial when the truth is too devastating to accept. The night of Sarah's announcement, after those 3 devastating words, "It's Dad's," the room fell into a silence so complete I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Michael stood frozen in the middle of the room, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, a pain so raw it made me want to look away. "That's impossible," I whispered, though even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. All those signs I'd dismissed, all those moments I'd explained away, they were confession enough. Harold finally looked up from his hands. The man I'd loved for more than half my life looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize. There was shame there, yes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like relief. "Eleanor," he said, his voice hoarse, "I never meant for this to happen." "Never meant for what to happen?" I stood up on shaking legs. "Harold, tell me what's going on. Tell me this is some kind of sick joke." Sarah was sobbing now, her whole body shaking. Michael walked over to the window and stood there with his back to all of us, his shoulders rigid. I could see his reflection in the glass, tears streaming down his face. "It started a year ago," Harold began, and each word felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. "Sarah was having problems with Michael, working so much, feeling lonely and—" "Stop." The word came out sharper than I intended. "I don't want to hear your justifications." But Harold continued anyway, as if he'd been holding these words inside for so long they had to come out or kill him. "She needed someone to talk to. Someone who understood what it was like to feel neglected, to feel invisible in your own marriage." I stared at him. "Invisible in your own marriage? Harold, what are you talking about? When's the last time we really talked, Eleanor? When's the last time you looked at me, really looked at me, like you did when we were young?" The accusation hit me like a physical blow. "So this is my fault. I drove you into our daughter-in-law's arms." "No." Harold stood up, his voice rising. "That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying we both got comfortable. We both stopped trying. And Sarah, she made me feel alive again." Michael turned around then, his face streaked with tears. "She's my wife, Dad. My wife." The anguish in my son's voice broke something inside me that I don't think will ever heal. This wasn't just about Harold's betrayal of me. It was about his destruction of our son, our family, everything we'd built together. "How long?" I asked, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. "How long have you been sleeping with my son's wife?" Sarah flinched at my bluntness, but I was past caring about sparing anyone's feelings. Harold sat back down heavily. 8 months. 8 months. While I was planning their anniversary party, while I was knitting Christmas stockings for their future children, while I was believing in the fairy tale of our perfect family, my husband was having an affair with my daughter-in-law. "And the baby?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "We're sure it's mine," Harold said quietly. "The timing." Michael was traveling for work that week. I remembered that week. Harold had been gone a lot too, supposedly helping a friend with a roofing job. I'd even packed him lunches, kissed him goodbye each morning, told him to be careful on the ladder. Michael made a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "Do you know what the worst part is? I was happy when she told me she was pregnant. For about 30 seconds I was the happiest man alive." "Michael," Sarah spoke for the first time since her initial tears. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did." Michael's voice was cold now, controlled. "You hurt all of us. Both of you." I looked at Harold, really looked at him, and tried to find the man I'd married 52 years ago. The young construction worker who'd promised to love me forever, who'd cried when our son was born, who'd held my hand through every crisis we'd ever faced. He was still there, somewhere underneath the stranger sitting in my living room. But he was buried beneath layers of betrayal so thick I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to reach him again. "I need you to leave," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Harold looked up sharply. "Eleanor, we need to talk about this. We need to figure out what we're going to do." "We?" I shook my head. "There is no we anymore, Harold. You made sure of that when you decided to betray not just me but our son. Where am I supposed to go?" The question almost made me laugh. After 52 years of marriage, after destroying our family, he was worried about where he'd sleep tonight. "I honestly don't care," I said, and meant it. "Maybe Sarah has a suggestion." Sarah let out a fresh sob. "Eleanor, please. I know you hate me, but—" "I don't hate you," I interrupted, and I was surprised to realize it was true. "I'm devastated. I'm heartbroken. I feel betrayed and humiliated and lost. But I don't hate you." I looked around the room at the 3 people who had been my entire world just 2 hours ago. My husband, my son, my daughter-in-law. One family shattered into pieces I wasn't sure could ever be put back together. I need time to think, I said finally. I need all of you to give me space to figure out how to live with this. Michael walked over and kissed my cheek, his tears wet against my skin. I love you, Mom. This isn't your fault. But as I watched them all leave, Harold gathering some clothes from our bedroom, moving like an old man I'd never seen before, I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow it was. The house felt different after they left. It wasn't just the silence. I'd been alone in the house plenty of times over the years. It was the weight of betrayal hanging in the air like smoke, seeping into the walls, contaminating every memory these rooms held. I didn't sleep that first night. I wandered through the house Harold had built for us, touching things that suddenly felt foreign. The kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals. The couch where we'd watched Michael take his first steps. The bedroom where we'd made love, argued, reconciled, and dreamed together for 5 decades. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt real anymore. The phone started ringing the next morning. First Michael, his voice hollow and strained. Mom, how are you holding up? How was I holding up? I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question. My husband of 52 years was having an affair with my daughter-in-law. He was carrying his child. My son's world had been destroyed. How did he think I was holding up? I'm managing, I said instead, because what else do you say? I kicked her out, Michael said quietly. Sarah. She's staying at her friend's place. I closed my eyes. Another piece of our family fractured. Michael, you don't have to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm. I can't look at her right now, Mom. I can't be in the same room with her knowing that that the baby. He couldn't finish the sentence. Neither could I. Harold called an hour later. Eleanor, we need to talk. No, I said and hung up. He called back immediately. I let it ring. The pattern continued for days. Harold would call, sometimes multiple times a day, leaving voicemails that I couldn't bring myself to listen to. Michael would check on me, his voice getting more distant each time, like he was pulling into himself to protect what was left of his heart. Sarah called once, crying so hard I could barely understand her words, begging for forgiveness I wasn't ready to give. I stopped eating properly. Food tasted like cardboard and the effort of cooking for one felt pointless. I'd lost 15 pounds by the end of the first month. Weight I couldn't afford to lose at my age. My neighbor, Betty, started showing up with casseroles and worried looks. Eleanor, honey, you can't just waste away. Whatever's going on, starving yourself isn't the answer. Betty was one of my oldest friends, but I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth. How do you explain that your husband is having an affair with your son's wife? How do you say those words out loud without dying of shame? Harold and I are having some problems, I said finally, which was possibly the understatement of the century. Betty nodded knowingly. Marriage is hard work, especially after all these years. But you two have been through worse. Remember when he had his heart attack? You two were stronger after that. Stronger. The word felt like a cruel joke. I started sleeping in the guest bedroom. Our marital bed felt contaminated, haunted by the knowledge that Harold had been sharing intimacy with another woman while lying next to me night after night, pretending everything was normal. The worst part wasn't the loneliness, though that was crushing. It wasn't even the betrayal, devastating as that was. It was the way this revelation colored every memory, every moment we'd shared. Had he been thinking about Sarah when he kissed me goodbye in the mornings? When he told me he loved me? When we made love on our anniversary just 3 months ago? I found myself replaying every interaction from the past year, looking for clues I'd missed, signs I should have seen. The evidence was overwhelming once I allowed myself to see it. The extra attention to his appearance. The new cologne. The way he'd started working out again at 73, claiming he wanted to stay healthy for his golden years. The golden years. Another cruel joke. 6 weeks after that awful night, Michael showed up at my door looking like he'd aged 10 years. His clothes hung loose on his frame, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and emotional exhaustion. I need to ask you something, Mom, and I need you to be honest with me. I led him to the kitchen and put on coffee, giving myself time to prepare for whatever was coming. Did you know? He asked. Before that night, did you suspect anything? The question I'd been dreading. The one that kept me awake at night, wrestling with my own guilt and blindness. I saw signs, I admitted, watching his face carefully. Things that made me uncomfortable, made me wonder. But I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was seeing things that weren't there. Michael nodded slowly. Sarah says they didn't plan it. That it just happened. Do you believe her? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know what I believe anymore. I don't know if it matters. The result is the same either way. We sat in silence, drinking coffee that tasted bitter despite the sugar I'd added. My son looked broken and I felt helpless to fix him. How do you comfort someone when you're drowning in your own pain? She wants to talk to me about the baby, Michael said eventually. About what happens next. What do you want to happen next? I want to wake up and find out this was all a nightmare. He managed a weak smile. But since that's not an option, I honestly don't know. The baby is innocent in all this. But I can't. I can't be a father to my dad's child. I can't pretend that's normal. Neither could I be a grandmother to my husband's child. The whole situation was so twisted, so wrong on every level, that there seemed to be no good solution for anyone. Have you seen him? Michael asked. Dad. I shook my head. He's called. Left messages. I'm not ready. He's staying at that motel on Route 9. Looks terrible according to people who've seen him around town. Part of me, the part that had loved Harold for most of my adult life, felt a pang of concern. But it was quickly overwhelmed by anger. He'd made his choices. He could live with the consequences. Mom, Michael said as he was leaving, I want you to know that whatever you decide to do about Dad, about your marriage, I'll support you. This isn't your fault and you don't owe him anything. But as I watched my son drive away, his shoulders slumped with grief, I wondered if that was true. Maybe if I'd been a better wife, more attentive, more present, Harold wouldn't have turned to Sarah. Maybe if I'd confronted my suspicions instead of dismissing them, I could have stopped this before it went too far. Maybe. The word became a constant refrain in my head, a drumbeat of regret and self-recrimination that followed me through my empty days and sleepless nights. 2 months after that terrible night, Harold showed up at my door. I hadn't spoken to him since I'd hung up on his phone calls, hadn't seen him since he'd gathered his clothes and left with shame written across his face. He looked awful. Harold had always been a big man, solid and strong from years of construction work. But standing on my doorstep, he looked diminished. His clothes hung loose, his face was gaunt, and there was a defeated slump to his shoulders that made him seem older than his 73 years. Please, he said when I started to close the door. Just give me 5 minutes. I need to tell you something important. Against my better judgment, I let him in. We stood in the hallway. I wasn't ready to invite him further into the house, and faced each other like strangers. You look terrible, I said, and immediately felt foolish for caring. I feel terrible. His voice was hoarse, like he'd been crying or shouting or both. Eleanor, I made the biggest mistake of my life and I don't know how to fix it. You can't fix it, Harold. You can't take back 8 months of lying to my face, 8 months of betraying our son, 8 months of making me feel like a fool in my own marriage. He flinched at my words, but I wasn't done. Do you know what the worst part is? It's not even that you had an affair. It's that you had an affair with her. Sarah. The girl we both loved like a daughter. The girl who trusted us, who became part of our family. You didn't just betray me, Harold. You betrayed everything we built together. I know. The words came out as barely a whisper. I know, and I hate myself for it. Hating yourself doesn't fix anything. It doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't give Michael his wife back or his trust back or his father back. Harold leaned against the wall like he needed support to stay upright. She ended it. 3 weeks ago. She said she couldn't live with what we'd done anymore, couldn't keep destroying the family. I felt a flash of something, relief, vindication. But it was quickly overwhelmed by exhaustion. Too little, too late. She's keeping the baby, Harold continued. But she doesn't want anything from me. No support, no contact. She said she wants to raise it on her own, try to find some way to make peace with Michael eventually. And what do you want, Harold? What do you want from me? He looked at me, then really looked at me, and I saw the man I'd married in those brown eyes. Older, weathered by guilt and regret, but still him. I want to come home, he said. I want to find a way to fix this, to fix us. I want to spend whatever time I have left making this right. Making it right? I felt anger rise in my chest like a hot tide. How exactly do you propose to make this right? How do you fix the fact that you're going to be a father again at 73? How do you fix the fact that our son can't stand to look at either of us? How do you fix 52 years of marriage that you threw away for what? Excitement. A midlife crisis 30 years too late. I don't know, Harold admitted, and his honesty surprised me. I don't know if it can be fixed. But I know I love you. I know I never stopped loving you, not even when I was making the worst decisions of my life. Don't. I held up my hand. Don't you dare stand in my hallway and tell me you love me after what you've done. Love doesn't destroy. Love doesn't betray. Love doesn't choose its own selfish desires over the people who matter most. Harold was crying now, tears streaming down his weathered face. You're right. You're absolutely right, and I have no defense for what I did. But Eleanor, I'm begging you. Don't give up on us completely. Don't let 52 years end like this. You ended it, I said, and my own voice was shaking. The moment you touched her, you ended us. The moment you chose to lie to my face every single day for 8 months, you ended us. I didn't give up on anything, Harold. You gave up on everything. We stood there in silence, two people who had shared a lifetime, who had promised to love each other until death do us part, and I realized that in many ways, death had parted us. The Harold I'd married, the marriage we'd built, the family we'd created, it had all died the night I learned the truth. I'll sign whatever papers you want, Harold said finally. Divorce, separation, whatever you decide. But please, Eleanor, don't shut me out completely. We have a grandchild coming, and whether we like it or not, this situation affects all of us. The word grandchild hit me like a physical blow. In all the pain and betrayal, I'd almost forgotten that aspect of this nightmare. Harold was right, there would be a child. An innocent child who would forever be a reminder of the worst betrayal I'd ever experienced. I can't do this right now, I said, opening the door. I need more time. Harold nodded and walked toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Eleanor, you were the best thing that ever happened to me. I threw it away, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. After he left, I sat on my couch and cried for the first time since that awful night 2 months ago. I cried for the marriage I'd lost, for the man I'd thought I knew, for my son's broken heart, and for the grandchild I might never be able to love the way I should. But mostly I cried for myself. For the 75-year-old woman who had to figure out how to rebuild her life from the ashes of everything she'd believed in. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered by a young man who looked embarrassed to be handing legal documents to an elderly woman in her bathrobe. Harold had kept his word. The papers were fair, generous even. He was giving me the house, most of our savings, and asking for nothing in return except the freedom to sign away 52 years of marriage. I stared at those papers for 3 days before I signed them. Not because I was having second thoughts, but because signing them felt like admitting defeat. Like giving up on the fairy tale I'd believed in for most of my adult life. But some fairy tales I realized were never real to begin with. Sarah gave birth to a daughter in late April. Michael called to tell me, his voice carefully neutral. 7 pounds 2 ounces. They're both healthy. What's her name? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Grace Eleanor, he said softly. Sarah named her after you. The gesture should have touched me, but instead it felt like another complication in an already impossible situation. How do you hate someone who names their child after you? How do you love a child who represents the worst betrayal of your life? I didn't visit the hospital. I didn't send flowers or a card or any of the things you're supposed to do when a baby is born into your family, because I didn't know if this baby was family or not. I didn't know what she was to me or what I was to her. Harold called that evening. Eleanor, I know this is complicated, but she's beautiful. She looks just like Michael did when he was born. The irony wasn't lost on me. Harold's child with another woman looked like our son. Don't, I said. Don't try to make this some heartwarming family moment. Don't try to pretend this is normal. I'm not pretending anything. I'm just telling you that you have a granddaughter and she's perfect, and someday when you're ready, maybe you'd like to meet her. I hung up without responding. But the seed was planted. Over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about Grace Eleanor, about her tiny fingers and whether she had Harold's brown eyes or Sarah's blue ones, about whether she slept well or cried a lot or smiled in her sleep the way Michael had as a baby. I started taking long walks in the evenings, something I hadn't done in years. The physical movement seemed to help clear my mind, and the solitude gave me space to think without the weight of the house pressing down on me. During one of these walks, I ran into Sarah. She was pushing a stroller, looking tired but peaceful in a way I hadn't seen since before the truth came out. When she saw me, she stopped, her face uncertain. "Eleanor," she said softly. "How are you?" I almost kept walking. Almost pretended I hadn't seen her. But something made me stop. "I'm surviving," I said, which felt like the most honest answer I could give. "Would you?" Sarah hesitated, then took a deep breath. "Would you like to meet her?" "Grace." I looked down at the stroller, at the tiny face barely visible beneath a pink blanket. She was sleeping, her little fist curled near her cheek, and she was absolutely beautiful. "She does look like Michael," I said without thinking. Sarah smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in months. "Everyone says that. I think she has Harold's chin, but otherwise she's all you and Michael." The casual way she said Harold's name stung, but not as much as I'd expected. Maybe time was starting to dull the sharpest edges of my pain. "Sarah," I said, looking up from the baby, "I need you to know something. I don't forgive you. I don't know if I ever will. But I don't hate you either. And this little girl, she didn't ask for any of this." Sarah nodded, tears filling her eyes. "I know. And Eleanor, I know this doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I'm sorrier than you'll ever know." "I believe you," I said, and realized I meant it. "But sorry doesn't undo the damage." "No," Sarah agreed. "It doesn't." We stood there for a moment, two women whose lives had been forever changed by choices that couldn't be undone. Then Grace stirred in her stroller, making a tiny mewling sound, and Sarah's attention shifted to her daughter. "I should go," Sarah said. "She'll be hungry soon." I watched them walk away, this young woman and her baby, Harold's baby, and felt something shift inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of acceptance. That night I called Michael. "I saw Sarah today," I said. "And Grace." There was a long pause. "How do you feel about that?" "Confused," I said honestly. "She's beautiful, Michael." "The baby." "She's absolutely beautiful." "I know," Michael said quietly. "I've seen pictures." Have you thought about what happens next? About whether you might want to try to work things out with Sarah?" Another pause. "I don't know, Mom. I love her, I never stopped loving her. But I don't know if I can get past this. I don't know if I can look at that baby and not see Dad's betrayal. She's innocent, Michael. Whatever else is true, Grace is innocent." "I know that. Intellectually, I know that. But knowing it and feeling it are two different things." We talked for another hour, my son and I, trying to navigate a situation that had no roadmap, no clear path forward. By the end of the conversation, we hadn't solved anything, but we talked more honestly than we had in months. After I hung up, I sat in my quiet house and made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to survive this. I was going to find a way to build a new life from the wreckage of the old one. And maybe someday I'd even find a way to be happy again. It wouldn't be the life I'd planned. It wouldn't be the family I'd dreamed of. But it would be mine, and that was enough for now. 6 months have passed since that terrible night when my world came crashing down. As I sit here now telling you this story, I want you to know that I'm not the same woman I was then. The betrayal changed me, aged me in some ways, but also made me stronger in others. Harold and I are divorced. The papers were finalized last month, ending 52 years of marriage with a judge's signature and a stamp. He moved to Florida. Said he needed a fresh start somewhere nobody knew our story. We don't speak anymore, though Michael tells me Harold asks about me sometimes. The house feels different now. I've redecorated the bedroom, painted the kitchen a cheerful yellow, and started a garden in the backyard. I'm learning, slowly, how to be Eleanor again instead of Harold's wife or Michael's mother or someone's betrayed spouse. Just Eleanor, 75 years old, and figuring out who she is. Michael and Sarah are in counseling. They're not back together, may never be, but they're learning to communicate again to find some kind of peace for all their sakes. Michael has met Grace several times now. He says it's hard, but not as hard as he expected. Love, it turns out, is more complicated and more resilient than any of us imagined. And Grace, sweet little Grace Eleanor. I've seen her 4 times now. The first visit was awkward, painful, complicated by all the history and hurt between us. But she smiled at me during that visit. A real smile, not just gas, and something in my heart that I'd thought was broken forever cracked open just a little. She's 8 months old now, crawling and babbling and getting into everything the way babies do. When I look at her, I don't see Harold's betrayal anymore. I see Michael's eyes and my mother's stubborn chin. I see possibility and innocence and maybe, someday, healing. Sarah and I aren't friends. I don't know if we ever will be. But we're learning to be civil, to navigate this complicated situation we're all trapped in. She's a good mother to Grace, and that matters more than my hurt feelings. People in town still whisper when they see me at the grocery store or the post office. I've become that woman, the one whose husband left her for her daughter-in-law. The scandal that provides entertainment over coffee and speculation over dinner. But I've learned that other people's opinions of my life matter far less than my own opinion of how I handle it. I've started volunteering at the Literacy Center downtown, helping adults learn to read. It gives me purpose, gets me out of the house, reminds me that there are problems in the world bigger than my own heartbreak. Some of my students are older than I am, finally learning skills they missed as children. Their courage inspires me daily. I've also started writing, something I dreamed of doing when I was young but set aside for marriage and motherhood. Nothing fancy, just stories about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. My first story was published in the local paper last month. It was about a woman learning to live alone after decades of marriage. I didn't use real names, but anyone who knew our story understood what I was really writing about. The hardest lesson I've learned is this. Sometimes the people you trust most are the ones capable of hurting you most deeply. Harold didn't betray me because he was evil or calculating. He betrayed me because he was human and flawed and made choices that prioritized his own desires over the people who loved him. Does that excuse what he did? Absolutely not. Does it help me understand it? Sometimes. I've learned that forgiveness isn't something you do once and move on. It's something you choose again and again, every day, not because the person who hurt you deserves it, but because carrying that anger and resentment hurts you more than it hurts them. I haven't forgiven Harold completely. I may never forgive him completely. But I've forgiven him enough to sleep peacefully at night, to smile when I see something beautiful, to believe that my life isn't over just because my marriage is. I've learned that family is more complicated than blood and marriage certificates. Michael will always be my son. Grace will always be my granddaughter regardless of how she came to be. Sarah will always be complicated. But maybe that's okay. Maybe complicated is better than nothing at all. To anyone listening who's facing their own betrayal, their own earth-shattering revelation that changes everything they believed about their life, I want you to know this. You will survive it. Not unchanged. You can't go through something like this and remain the same person you were before. But you will survive it, and if you're very lucky and very determined, you might even find that the person you become is stronger than the person you were. Life is long, longer than we realize when we're young and think we have it all figured out. There's time for second acts, for new beginnings, for finding joy in places you never expected to look. There's time to rebuild, to recover, to rediscover who you are when everything you thought you knew gets stripped away. Some truths break your family. Others rebuild the pieces you didn't know were missing. I'm still figuring out which kind mine will be. But I'm still here. I'm still standing. I'm still Eleanor, and that's more than enough to build a new life on. Thank you for listening to my story. If it helps even one person feel less alone in their darkest moment, then sharing it was worth the pain of reliving it. Remember, you are stronger than you know, and your story isn't over yet.